Hey everybody, my name is Eric. I am a software engineer. I have been for about 14 years. I've been working in Angular for about the last 6 or 7 years. And this video is going to be another in a series, um, making some test helpers that are going to be more natural to use for an Angular developer than you might otherwise have. And first, I want to start by just going over my motivation here, how I got to doing this, because I don't just randomly dream of writing test helpers. Um, but I was working on this Sudoku app that you see here, and the most recent feature I added was when you have it on your phone, on my phone, um, and you're sitting there staring at it for a while. This keeps the screen on. The browser has a feature called a wake lock nowadays. Not all browsers do, but they're catching up. And so there's this navigator wakelock.request, and that returns a promise. This is a asynchronous API. And I know that I want to make this really cool function I made, put this in one of my open source libraries. And so I know when I do that, I'm going to want to have it very well tested, and before I tell the world that they can come use my cool keep wake lock function for their apps as well. And so I'm thinking about writing those tests. And in the past, I have noticed the difference in experience between an Angular developer is used to. The most common asynchronous thing they're used to dealing with in tests is HTTP requests, I think. And Angular comes with a framework for stubbing those out in your test so that you can control it, not have it actually go out to the network, all that kind of stuff. And the experience there is once you sort of enable it, is your code that you're testing just makes a call out to the network, it thinks, as far as it knows. And then after that in your test, you expect that call to have happened, and you can tell it to resolve, basically simulate a response value from the server. And that's the opposite of how normal like Jasmine stubbing works, where you set up like the return value at the beginning, before the production code actually hits it. And so I've thought in the past I would just like that to be consistent between both approaches. And so I'm making, before I move this helper out into an open source library, first I want to add a test helper to a different open source library that then I can use to write the tests for this one. And I'm sort of popping, deep in the weeds of this rabbit trail, or down a stack, up a stack. And so the last, I've made 4, I think. I've already been working on this for 4 videos. And here, it even went deeper, because here in this code, async method controller, that's what I'm creating to mirror Angular's HTTP testing controller. I'm making this async method controller for stubbing out any asynchronous method that you want, and being able to interact with it in a similar way of those Angular HTTP tests. And so here's this nth function that I decided I wanted. And so then that was yet another layer down. I created this function first and added that to a different open source library so that I could use it here in this one, so that I could then put the other open source library so that I could then use it in my Sudoku app. So such a simple thing. I just have this, what is this, like 10 lines of code or something, and now I'm on my 5th video of live coding a bunch of infrastructure around it so that I can do this easily. And not just easily, but in the way that I think I would like to test these things, and any asynchronous method that I use in a test going forward. And any one that you use if you like it and want to use my library. So anyway, that was a long introduction. Let's start digging in. I made a nice little to-do list for myself during previous streams, or in between maybe, to be able to just sort of follow along. It's already sort of roughly in the order I want to go. So let's just go to the top of the list. We have this thing called a test call, and it has a property on it called call, and we want to make sure that that's well tested. And so let me just go show you what that is all about. So this is the Angular test framework stuff that, there we go, that I'm writing an API to mimic. And it has, when you call like expect one, it returns a test request. And so when you go look at the test request, it has a property on it called request. So similar in what I'm doing, I have this controller with like, for example, expect one that returns a test call. And the test call has a, oh, it's a call info, not call. So we already have this, and it's already working, I know, because I happen to use it in some of the other tests, but I want a specific test just for calling out, sorry, I'm stumbling because I'm trying to decide, do I want to test here that says that it just exists and is populated, or do I want to test here saying that it's given the correct value? It feels more useful to test this code, the return value of this expect one function. And it's also returned from these, interesting, it's also returned from these this match method returns an array of them. So yeah, I don't want to write two tests. Right. I don't want to write two tests that show that it has this call info object. So I'm going to write one test here. Great. Okay, so let's get down to it. So what do we want to test about this call property? I mean, not much. This should be quick and easy, and we can move on to the next thing. Let's just say that it, not call info. Let's just say it is populated with a jasmine.callinfo object. And I think that's pretty much all we care about here for this specific test. The other, like these tests that return it, will have embedded in them that it has like the correct information in it. Like here we tested that the argument on that call object is correct and all that kind of thing. So this should just be a simple sanity check. So let's see, we want to get a hold of one of these. One of my philosophies when I'm writing tests is that I want to interact with the code the same way a user will, or simulate it as best I can. If it's an Angular application, that's going to be simulating mouse clicks and keyboard strokes and that sort of thing. This is a testing API, so I can actually I don't have to simulate it, I can actually use it. I can actually be a user. But that means I'm not going to create one of these test call objects directly, because that's never how a user is going to create one. They're always going to get it from one of these async calls like expect one or match. And expect one seems like an easier way to go. So let's go find an expect one test to sort of model ours after for the initial setup. Finds a matching method call sounds great. So let's read and write. We got error messages. All right, we can start with this. I think we can make it simpler. I already know, let's see, let's think about what the final expectation should be, and then work our way back up to how much of this setup we actually need in this particular test. Another philosophy is keep the code, the test as focused as you can. If you don't care about values passed in and you don't need two calls to your anything, in this case this write text, then don't do it. That's just noise that future readers of this code are going to have to sift through to figure out what's really happening in your test. So anyway, I think in the end, the call info object, I think we probably want to say, let's see, what does one do we actually have a class that we could show, like to be an instance of something? That would be a great test right there. We can go investigate that. In fact, let's start with that and just see if we can. We'll run a little test. To be an instance of, I don't know, date. Let's make something we know is certainly false. We'll get the error message and inspect it and see what this thing actually is. I mean, the sort of what do I want to say? The goal that I really want to have for this test is that it's giving us one of these Jasmine objects that you can do anything that you could with a Jasmine call object. It's giving you one of those. Just like in, because I'm modeling it after the Angular framework, where this test request gives you the actual HTTP request object that you can inspect and do anything that you normally would. So the analog, instead of the request, is the actual call. So right, and what's the minimum we would need to get this to work? Well, we don't need this whole, if we switch to read text and just make one call, we're not going to need these extraneous like strings hanging around our code, making it just sort of more complex. We don't really care about what all those values are. Let's just make this, oh gosh, expect one can take, what's the simplest way we can do this? We can take an array that the arguments should match, and because there are no arguments, that should be the empty array. And I think that should do it. And because we're not really so much worried about the match in this test, we're worried more about the call info. Let's just get that up here. And so the general pattern for a simple test like this that I like to follow is, first you do all of the sort of setup code, blank line, then you exercise the code, you actually run the function that you're testing or something like that, and then a blank line, and then all of your expectations about it after that. And it feels like, this call info is really the thing that we would then want to run all the expectations on. So I'll get that up there. Okay, so let's just see where we're at here and what kind of object this really is. My tests are running. That's good. So let's actually pull them up. Ooh, expected object to be instance of date. It's not very promising. It may not actually have a prototype we can use. This was in the test call spec. I just want to set a breakpoint there and see what we're dealing with. So this call info is just an object. It doesn't have a prototype that we can test the way I was really hoping, because that would, if we could have put something here like Jasmine dot, I don't know, call info as a prototype for this, that would have done it. So what's a nice alternative? Let's pull up the typing for this call info and see if anything jumps out at us. So a call info object is pretty simple. It only has these three things: the return value, the args, and the object. So maybe we could just pick one or two of them, leave a note. I'm going to leave a note and say, we'd love to test that this is just an instance of Jasmine.call info, but that's not really a thing. So we'll approximate it by ensuring a couple properties exist. So let's just say call info dot, I don't know, return value is an instance of promise. Let's see if that works. And we'll do that for maybe object and a couple things and call that close enough. Hey, yeah, sure enough, that works. Great. So let's just do one more for good measure. Let's make sure that the object, and this is, the object is going to be navigator.clipboard. That should have been the context to be navigator.clipboard. And then that's convincing enough to me that this certainly is, it must be one of those Jasmine objects that we're expecting, because you can do, you know, the same things with it that you would expect for one of those. Okay, I think that's great. I think that's great. Cool, and that's marking one off of our list. Let's call that a commit. That was a nice isolated thing. We fully implemented it and tested it. So let's just get that in there. Let's see. Now we are using conventional commit messages for our. If we follow a special format called conventional commit, then later when I'm releasing this, there's tooling you can run that will just automatically create the changelog and choose the new version number based on what we do here. So this was, oh no, I am off working on a separate branch doing a whole bunch of little commits that I'm eventually going to squash down into one big one, and that's when I need to worry about all of that. Right, because there's a whole lot of work going into just this one test helper. So I'm going to off in a separate branch doing all the different pieces of it. And so the commit message is not as important. It's more just for my own use when I'm reviewing the code, if I happen to want to, before I squish it, I forget, down into one commit to merge into master. So we're just test call info. Great. We'll go ahead and push that up to GitHub. And if you're checking this out on YouTube later, I'll put links down in the description for this code so you can go check it out yourself. Get it? Check it out. Because in Git, you might actually check it out. Anyway. All right. Let's move on. Next up is verify. So this is actually a whole new feature or method to add to our test helpers. So we are trying to write a controller of our own to work with any asynchronous method in any of your tests that's going to mimic this HTTP testing controller. So it's going to be a very familiar way to deal with these asynchronous method calls, the same way an Angular developer is used to dealing with HTTP calls. And it has this verify on there, and what does it do? It verifies that no unmatched requests are outstanding. Oh, and let's look at the details again here too. If any requests are outstanding, fail with an error message indicating which requests were not handled. Okay, that's great. That's good feedback for us to incorporate. If ignore canceled is not set, will also fail if canceled requests were not explicitly matched. There's no, so HTTP requests can be canceled, and then that affects the way the stubbing framework can deal with them. We don't really have, promises don't have a cancel. And so if we're just dealing with any asynchronous method that could return a promise, we don't have an analog there. So we can ignore that second sentence. But, and it says, fail with an error message. I happen to know from some of the previous methods that we've implemented here that means it's going to throw an error, a JavaScript error, with this in the message property of that error. Okay, so we want to go to our controller and add, probably down here, a verify. And that's going to not return anything. It will throw an error if, there's actually a problem. And so let's stick with, often when I'm writing an app, I don't often use a TDD, test-driven development style of coding. because I want to play with things and get them laid out, and I'm not sure where all the code is going to go yet until I actually see it working. And because I always write my tests next to the exact same file of the line of code that it's testing, I don't know where to write my tests yet. And so I play with it in the production code and then I test it. Now in this case, I've got a very clear plan. I know exactly what it needs to do. And so I can use the TDD style, which is great in that kind of situation, because then you're very sure that all the tests in the production code are, you've got full test coverage. Everything is, all of your tests are actually doing something meaningful. And oh gosh, I just happened to notice as I was looking at this, the order of methods between the production and test are different. That doesn't really matter, but for some reason I feel like I want them to match. So let me just move that around a little bit real quick. So we have expect one up at the top, followed by expect none, followed by match. And I did it that way because, here, let me shrink these down to more of an outline as well. Because this one and this one both call match as part of their implementation, and I like to have my higher level methods at the top and the more detailed methods at the bottom. Anyway, that's not very important, just my style. So before I go any further, I want to do a commit with just this quick little change so that it doesn't add to the noise. If someone goes and looks at, it's not going to be real important in this case, but I'm just in the habit, writing code that team members might come look at and review later. It's nice to have a nice consistent commit that's focused on the one task that it's accomplishing. And I don't really want this, just moving some code around as part of that. So I'm going to just make a quick little commit just for that. Reorder test to match the order of methods in the production code. And this was not part of that. So this is going to be part of the real commit I'm trying to make, and then this we're just going to get out of the way. Great. So now let's describe a verify. And what does verify need to do? What's the simplest thing we can make it do first? I'll tell you what we can do. We can just show that it does not throw an error when you have a case that it doesn't need to, and then this code's already working for that. So that's definitely the simplest thing. So it does not throw an error when all requests have been expected. All calls have been expected. And so let's go ahead and make a couple of calls. Probably just one call, actually. Let's make it more like this one we did here. I'll start with this. We've got a single call. Okay, so I tell you what I want to do. I want to show just deciding where to put it. No error when no calls were made at all. So I'm going to expect controller.verify not to throw error. And then we'll do this again. And then expect it again to pass after you've made a call, but then also expected it. No error when a call was made, but also already expected. Great. And TDD, often you write a failing test first, and that's going to show you, like, it's hard to write a failing test for this. I'm going to have to artificially say throw new error, just so that I can prove that this, if my code is wrong over here, the test is actually going to fail. So that's the first thing I want to do. Prove that when the code is wrong, the test will fail. So hopefully we have a failing test right now. Expected it not to throw an error, but it did. And now, if we put that back, it should pass. Great. One test down, one behavior down. Now we need to get into all the cases that it does throw an error. That's the real interesting part of all this. And not only that, we're going to need to have all the right error messages for them. But one step at a time. Let's just make sure that it does throw an error if there is an outstanding request. It throws an error if there is an outstanding, not request, I keep saying that, if there's an outstanding call. I'm still stuck on the HTTP world. Okay. So that's going to be very similar to this, but we're not going to expect it. So this is all set up. Here in our case, I like to normally have a separate section for exercising the code versus doing the expectations, but because of the way this Jasmine expect to throw error works, I sort of have to have them rolled up into one. You know, if I were to try and do this before I do the expectation, then it's going to actually throw the error instead of being able to catch it and verify that it has the right message and all that kind of stuff. So now we are expecting it to throw an error. That's what the test should do. So now this is more the TDD style. I'm going to write a test that, if my code was working, would pass, but because I haven't written the code for it yet, is going to fail. So the sort of like quick, like easy way to remember this is red, green refactor. It's red. See all the red? First you make it red, then you turn it green. Now this is the interesting point. How do we turn this green? All right, so we have, right, I'm remembering how I set this up already. So we have this array of calls, and when we expect one of them, we pull it out of that array and remove it from the array. So basically we need to test that this array is empty. If there's anything in this array, then we throw an error. So if this dot test calls dot length, if length is 0, throw new error. If length is 0, this will be falsy and it won't throw the error. If length is anything other than 0, like 1 or more, we will throw the error. So that we were red. Now hopefully we're green if I just wrote that correctly. Yes. And so now, because I've written a test for both the times that it should not and that it should throw an error, I know that it's working. You know, both cases of this if statement are working now. And so that's the sort of beauty of test-driven development. If you start with the simplest possible thing, you slowly add more and more, get closer and closer to your desired feature set. And each step of the way, you know that you have everything simpler is working as you add that next more complex piece. So it really is a great style to work in if you already know exactly what your code should do and where the code should be written before you start. Great. So, gosh, that's almost done, except for we have to get the error messages correct, and that's probably going to be the bulk of the work in this feature. I'm trying to decide if I think it's useful to have another test or to add more to this test if there's like more than one call outstanding. And I kind of feel I kind of feel like I prefer that for some reason. Like I think I'd like to do 2 calls here, expect it to throw an error. So, gosh, let me sort of do that. So, when multiple calls have not been expected, and then another one when some calls have already been expected, but not all of them. I feel like, I don't know, I kind of feel like that makes sense to me. It's probably not necessary, but I don't know. It's how much, it's not going to hurt anybody to have a little bit extra test in here. And so that should hopefully still be passing. Oh, okay. This is, if I want to expect 1, it has to match exactly 1. That's interesting. I wonder if I wrote a test for that. Finds a matching call, removes the matching call. Oh, throws an error. Yeah, throws an error when there is more than 1 match. So we can't be going around causing errors that we're not trying to test, which means we have to switch to that more complicated write text version that takes an argument, and then we can expect just the one with the correct argument. So call 1, or yeah, let's do call 1 and call 2. And then we'll expect just, I don't know, call 2. But call 1 has not yet been expected, and so we would still expect this to throw an error, because that's the point. Bam! Okay. So we've got the basic functionality working, but now there was all that, where was it? Here. If any requests are outstanding, fill with an error message indicating which requests were not handled. Now that's going to be interesting, because how are we going to print a meaningful message to indicate, if you've made 3 calls to some arbitrary asynchronous function, and you want to see which ones are still outstanding? I guess the only thing we really have to go on are is the arguments that were passed to each one. So we could print out some sort of representation of the argument list of each one. And have we done something like that before? We have this build error message. We've done some error messages before. The description stringifies. Yes, we sort of stringify with JSON. We JSON stringify the arguments of the outstanding call, in this case, as the representation. Okay. So we know we want a message that includes the list of these sort of stringified arguments arrays. But sort of how is it worded? And I would like to even word it similar to the way Angular does in their HTTP testing controller that we're trying to mimic. So we can go to a test that uses it, and make it fail, and just look at the error message Angular gives us and model ours after it. And I pulled one up before when I've been working with this, but I don't remember exactly where it is. So I need to search for it again. I think with expect 1 is how I found it. Yes, this was it. So here I have a test that's actually calling that. So instead of expect 1, before we expect it, let's call verify and see what error message is printed out. expected no open requests, found one, colon, and then the name of it. Okay. Okay. And that's very similar in structure to what we have. Like if we look at expect one and it throws a message when there is more than one match. We expected one matching. I wrote request. That should not be request. That should be call. I've baked this into my production code, into my tests. Didn't notice it because, wow. Okay, well, we can fix that too. Let me write a note for that. You know what? I'm not going to need to write a note. We're going to have to fix it for this, for our test that we're writing right now, and then that's going to propagate itself through all these. So expected one matching call for we don't have any criteria. So we're going to drop this whole part of the message. And then at the end, we're going to add, where'd it go? This sort of like list. And actually, I'd like to see how they represent their list. Let me do a second call. Why don't I just do this twice? Will that give me a second call? Probably. So they just have a comma separated list. And that's not going to work very well for us because we're going to have, we're going to print out potentially an array of arguments. So if we just comma separate them, it's going to look like one really long, redundant string of all of them. I almost feel like putting some new lines in the actual error. And I feel like I've seen frameworks do that. Have a sort of somewhat formatted error message, even if it's embedded in a JavaScript error object. I feel like that's going to be the most useful for someone. I'm using this right now exactly how I expect my end users to be using it, and it'd be fine to have new lines here. Although, let's see what happens if we print a new line in this message. We'll have to play with that. I don't know if it's actually going to put a line break here in this HTML page, if it's going to be smart enough or I don't know, set up for that. It certainly would down here in this pre-formatted version. Okay. So we'll play around with that last part, but for now, let me just copy this. This is our sort of pattern to follow. And we might want to break this down into a number of tests. Maybe just two tests. I'll write one test for the beginning part and then a separate test for the formatting of all the arguments. Because I feel like I'm probably going to want to test when there's just one versus many to see that there's a line break in between. I feel like I'm going to hit my my boundary cases, when there's the minimum number of things and then beyond. And I don't want to have to repeat all of this beginning part for both of them because that's not what those tests will be focused on. So let's first start the first half. It includes information about it includes the number of outstanding of open calls in the error message. Yeah, that sounds good. So that's going to be basically this, repeated again. We don't really care. We can go back to just read text so that we can simplify. we can simplify the test setup a little bit. And then to throw an error. Yes, and I had some fancy pattern for here testing the. No, somewhere in a previous test I already had tests that just focused on a portion of the error message itself. Where was that? I like to be consistent. I mean, there's many ways to do it, but I want all of my tests to do it the same way because I don't know, I just like consistency. It makes it a lot easier to just, once you've read one part of it and understand it, you can quickly skim the rest and understand it more quickly because you don't have to read two different ways of doing the same thing and figure out that they're doing the same thing. Here it is. To throw matching. All right, it was built right into Jasmine. Throw matching, we get the error and we want the message to include something like this, but tweaked a bit. Expected no open requests, open calls, found 2. I'm going to move this example to the bottom again because by the time we're done, we won't need that comment anymore. So now we should have a failing test. Our message does not include this text, and then we'll make it include it. So hopefully we are, I also want to fix this so it's not polluting my screen. I can more quickly pick the one test I'm actually focused on right now. Okay. Expected it to throw, yep, but it threw with blank message, matching a predicate. Well, okay, that's fine. But it threw, right. So let's make it pass. What's the simplest way to make this pass? Just make it throw that string. Oh, look, it passes. Now, that may seem silly. We know that this is not what the code is going to end up looking like. But what I've done is shown that this test alone is not really sufficient to prove that it's getting the number from exactly where it should. And how do I really prove that? I mean, I have 2 tests with 2 different, 2 expectations with 2 different numbers. And so let's do something similar to before. Let's get one of them to match and then have it drop down to 1. Now we have to everything I was telling you about simplifying the code, I'm going to undo all that now and make it exactly the same. So our setup in this part is now identical. Oh, I don't want that message though. And this is write text. And so now we want it to say that it found 1. And I don't know whether to address this now or to wait for a minute, but I've noticed that now these 2 tests are literally identical, except this is a more specific test than that one. So I'm going to get rid of that. I don't want 2 tests that are identical, except one tests even more than the other. So I'll merge these into just one test. But I want to make sure that the description clearly states both things now that I'm testing in this one single test. If I just remove this, let me do a comment for now. And all I care about is that it includes the number of open calls. And let's say sometime in the future we change our feature set and we no longer include the number of calls. I don't want to read this description and think, oh, that doesn't matter anymore, and just simply delete it, not realizing that it's actually two different aspects of this that I'm trying to test in one all at once. So I need to call that out clearly in the description for future, to keep the tests great in the future when we might need to refactor or move or change things around. So I need to combine these into one statement. If there's an outstanding call. So, I mean, I could start with just something like this, including the number of open calls in the error message. I mean, how can I shorten that now? That's awful wordy. It throws an error if there's an outstanding call. There's an error. The number of open calls. I mean, that's the best I can come up with, I guess. When multiple calls, when right, and then I already had some. Okay, I have to be careful. I'm going to undo and look at my error message and be very careful not to change anything so that I can then redo. And if I would have accidentally hit a wrong key, I would have lost my redo. That was dangerous. If you want to be safe about that, you'll go look at your local history, and you can go see back in here before I deleted everything, wherever it was. I could have copied it from there. I suppose if I'm going to show you that anyway, I might as well have just done it the right way to begin with. But anyway, that should be in my clipboard now. And now we should be red again, and we have to turn it green by improving the way we wrote our production code. So we expected it to be one thing, and it doesn't state clearly there what it is because of the way we wrote the test, but instead it said 2 because we hard-coded it to that. Okay, so now let's actually get more serious about, so this process of just slowly doing little pieces at a time, it'd be much quicker if I wasn't trying to explain everything as we go once you're used to it. But what it does for you is now we're sure that we've written a test that fully covers all the scenarios of what we're trying to test so far. It would have been easy for me to just make this work correctly right from the beginning, but then maybe I wouldn't have realized that I should test both cases here in order to ensure that I've done it correctly. So the real benefit to me of TDD is that it really gets you a very solid test suite for regressions in addition to good production code. The danger when you write the tests later is that you might miss things in your test, and then if those break in your code, the test doesn't fail and it gets out into production. Okay, so now I happen to know that what I want this to really do is delegate down to this build error message, and we want to make this, there's a lot of things in common between all the different ways that we throw errors, either in verify or expect one. They're sort of structured the same with some placeholders substituted in depending on the situation. I've just observed that from looking at the error messages themselves, so I feel like that's going to be the right oh great, that's going to be the right sorry. I'm having trouble thinking and talking at the same time. I will take a drink of water and compose myself. All right. We want this to delegate down to, oh no, just this part, to delegate down to this dot build error message. And the match, we don't actually have 1. And so we're not trying to match on anything in particular. And so that's going to be our sort of indicator down here. So this is going to be able to be undefined. I'd like to, instead of just make it or undefined and have to spell out undefined and have this like, right, I could say undefined here, put a, I don't even know what all goes into this yet. Expected match count is 0, and then match is just going to be all of them. But if I come back and look at this code later, be like undefined, that's meaningless. And so when you start getting lots of arguments, like 4 is probably I think the maximum number of arguments you'd ever really want before you switch to destructuring, passing in an object, so that instead of this, I'm going to pass in something like matches is undefined. And now this isn't like a magic, what does that undefined mean anymore? Now it's a little more clear what's going on. This is especially true for like these numbers or booleans. If you have a long list of arguments and it just reads 75 true true and then some string, you're like, well, what do those mean? It's harder to read. So what I'd like to do is just sort of refactor a little bit and move this match down into something we destructure. Oops. Okay, and then where I call it, I'm going to have to do the same thing. So now nothing much changes here. Oops, because these were already named the same as the arguments themselves. But down here now, I don't need this anymore. And it's going to complain because this isn't allowed to be undefined, but now let's say it is allowed to be undefined. All right. Oh, I did still want that string. Description. Oh, what are you saying? Oh, expected match count is a string? A count is a string? What was I doing? Oh, because I passed in 0. Oh, no, that makes a lot of sense, because our message we're going to want is no. The number is no. The count. We'll have to come up with a better name for that. I'm going to make it blah for now so that I know that in the future I can write a failing test, a red test that I turn green. And what's your deal? Oh, did I mean to write match? I sure did. Thanks for suggesting that, TypeScript. Okay. Right. And so now in here, we need to actually handle this case where there is no match. So the match that we're being passed in, let's come up with a better name for that. This is in the error message representing the criteria, the criterion by which you are trying to do the match. So let's name it that. Let's name it criterion. Whoa, searching for matches in 25 files. What are you doing to me, WebStorm? Okay, it didn't actually change too much. It only changed the things it should. Okay. Right, so we're expecting a match count for this criterion of the description, which we built up from the criterion we passed in. That all seems to make sense to me now. And how do we want to handle this case where it could be undefined? I mean, we could do something like this and say, don't worry about it, TypeScript. I know that that is defined because I passed in a description. Except we don't know. Are we passing in a description yet? Are we going to need to pass in a description? What is that? Description for criterion description. This description, we're going to leave all of this out for our case, right? We're going to expect no. Oh, I do already have the red test for that, so I can fill that in. We're turning it green now. Expected no open requests. Sure, no open requests. We're going to leave all of this out, and we'll say we found two. And also this says matching, whereas now we say open. Okay, this is getting out of hand. I noticed this before when trying to mimic Angular's error messages. They're too fancy. There's no use. There's no actual value to making it that like tailored to the specific situation. Like it used to say, I noticed in Angular it said the count was, or no, it found the matches.length. If it was 0, it spelled out the letters ZERO instead of putting the digit 0 there. It's like, why would I write code for that? That doesn't help my user. I have to write, fancier code for it, maybe write extra tests for it. And so I'm going to decide to be a little less fancy than Angular and still get all of the same benefits. So how shall we rewrite this to make it a little easier on ourselves? So let's go look at the error message from up here. Someplace where we can see another example to compare and see how we can make these a little more consistent without as much variation to have to write code around. Expected 0 versus no. Again, that's crazy. Matching versus open. Requests. Okay, so we can. Oh, requests should be calls. So we got this part could vary. Let's see if we can get this part not to. Or hey, why don't we pass in this whole thing? If we can come up with a nice name for that and we pass it in from both places, then we won't have to be as fancy. So that was called the expected match count. And it's not just the count anymore. It's if you don't know what to name something, that might be an indication that maybe you are thinking about trying to do the wrong thing. Zero matching. This is the expected description, and then this is the so if you don't provide this, then we use this. Okay, that's easy enough. that means that we could here say the description is oh, sorry, I'm going crazy. That's used down here. No, these are used in two different places. Okay, back to what we're saying. Expected description. We're going to have to rename these a little bit, but let's get it working and then get the names right. So, right, this is a valuable lesson even for myself to remind myself. It's the process is red, green, refactor. Write a failing test that's red, turn it green to make the code work, then refactor and make it all like structurally nice and look pretty. That gets you quickly to a good test suite so that as you shuffle things around, every time you can rerun your test suite and make sure that everything still works. So let's do it. We're not going to think too hard about the names right now. We're just going to make it work, and then we'll come back and refactor. Obviously, that's what TDD does. So the expected description we're going to pass in now is no open. And then here we're going to have to change this to 0 matching. And up here we're going to have to say 1 matching. And I think that should at least keep the existing, all the other tests except this one green. So let's at least do that part. So I did a little refactor. Oh, no. And this is why it's useful to do red-green refactor. Do it the simplest thing possible before you go messing around, because if you do a whole bunch of refactoring and then everything's red, it could have been anything you got wrong anywhere in there, right? And so now we at least know that only as much as I've refactored so far, the error is only in there. I haven't done too much yet. Learning by failing. I see the love from Ende there. Thank you for the follow, and I'm glad that you're entertained by my troubles. I am entertained as well. Great. What did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? Expected function to throw but it threw a type error with message. Cannot read property name of undefined. So we're trying to read name. Remember when I added that exclamation point and then started talking about things and forgot that it was there? That was TypeScript telling me, hey buddy, this could be undefined. You might get an error right there. Well, and I said, don't tell me what to do, TypeScript. I know what I'm doing. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. Okay. Right, so the criterion we passed in here was undefined, and that caused an error because we don't have a description. And so instead we're coming into here. So let's make a case for when there's no description nor criterion. And in that case, there's going to end up with no, like we're not going to build up the description, we're going to end up with none at all. How can I do this quickly without writing a bunch of code? How can I learn my lesson and just make this work and then come back and refactor it? I don't know. Else if criterion. I'm glad that your cat and you are both entertained, and I'm genuinely glad to hear that you're finding it, instructive. That's exactly why I'm doing this as a live stream. So I like to just do projects in my free time. I do lots of side projects, and just recently I decided to give this live streaming thing a try, thinking shoot, I'm doing this anyway. If I just sort of like talk through it out loud as I go, maybe some people will find that interesting and useful. And if so, then I can do that. And if not, then fine, I'll give up on live streaming and just go back to doing it for myself. So really cool to hear that that it is useful. All right, expected function to throw an error with this. What's the difference? I'm not spotting it. Let me just copy. This is what we expected. I'm just going to grab a little text document here. Wow, that's not where I meant to click. Grab a little scratch pad with text here, and so that's what we expected. And here's what we actually got. Oh. Oh, yes. Okay, so we added the, makes perfect sense. So we added those strings up here for matching. So it means we need to remove them from here. Okay. There's where I thought we were going to be. Okay, so get back on track, do the minimum possible to turn this green, and then go refactor. Red, green, refactor. Right, and so I want something that says expected no open requests for, oh no, I want this predicate. Expected no open calls, found 1. So there's 2 changes there. One is calls, and the other is to get rid of this whole section. I think the first thing I want to do is get rid of this whole section. So maybe what we need to do is build this up piece by piece. Let message equal. We unconditionally have, let me just make a copy of it up here, but then we unconditionally have this much. And then we might tack on to it. Let's see. If we want to have, oops, a section for the criterion, then we're going to tack some more stuff onto this guy. Yeah, let me just move the whole thing up into there for now. Then we're going to add on a description of that criterion by saying the message. We're going to add to it this part. And then at the end, unconditionally, we're going to finish it out. Oops. Oh my gosh, I can do it. And then we're going to return the message. And yeah, we're going to have to do some real refactoring here. Now this is too long, and I'll explain that, why I do that in a minute. But okay, let's see how close we're getting. So we should have fixed at least the expected no open requests. That should say matches, found 2. And how close is that to what we wanted here? Expected no open calls, found very close. Okay, so we've got a colon there to worry about, and we've got a changing this. Now let's switch this. Fix the error that I had in all of my previous work on this thing. This should be expected that many calls. So now that's going to turn all of our other tests red, because now all the other tests have that string request in there, and we're going to have to now fix. Actually, the tests are what are wrong in this case. So let's search for this string anywhere and change it to calls. Ooh, that didn't do it. expected zero matching calls, but instead I got expected zero matching calls. So I messed something else up too, not just that word. No, that's the only thing I changed. All right. I wish this was a little easier to read, but we can go back to this trick. Oh, calls. How many S's are in calls? Oh my goodness. Great. Sorry that you're watching me struggle through all this craziness, but we'll get it. We'll get back to something a little smoother in a minute. I hope. Okay, back to just one failure. Ooh, I have a greeting here from someone named Tzwr. I'm sure there's a much better way to pronounce that, but hello, thanks for joining. Okay, so how close are we to turning this thing green? It threw expected, no open calls, found one. We know there should be a colon on the end. And so, but it's only for this case that we're doing this verify. Only for the case where we're doing the verify. Let's make sure that's true. I want to just make sure that if we have two of these in the Angular framework that we're trying to mimic, that there is no list of things that it could have matched on the end. Before we go trying to be consistent with Angular, let's make sure we know exactly what Angular is doing. We have that right. Yeah, there is not. Found two. Oh, and this just says requests. Okay. So in the expect one case, we're just going to put the string, in our case, calls. But then in the function we're writing now, we're going to actually list out a description of those calls. And I'm going to assume that the Angular team did that for a reason, that they thought about it pretty closely before they wrote all the code and tests on their end. That's actually going to be useful for my users as well. I mean, after all, the whole point is to make it natural for someone to test any async function the same way they are used to testing those HTTP calls. Yeah, thanks for the greeting. I'm doing well. I'm having fun actually. Enda and me and his or her cat are having a good time, just bumbling through this right now. But yeah, good spirits for sure. Thanks for asking. Okay, we can put that back. Oh, let me leave it for a minute. First, let me go get all the existing things to expect that it's going to have that requests on there. Because in the end, the simplest thing I can do to turn it green. Yeah, okay. So any place where I have this found, I'm probably going to want to found zero calls. So we're going to turn all of these red and then do the minimum necessary to turn them green. Right, and we're going to leave that alone. Oh, it looks like there's some more down here. No, that's not the full message. And then we'll be free to refactor things. So the minimum necessary is to put the word calls there, hard code it. And we hopefully end up with, oh, we still have a few. We still have a few failing. Oh no, this was, okay. Stop confusing myself. Put this back so this one is passing. And then we should only have one more left that I would have expected to be green. Uh, expect 1. This is the one that should be passing now. So, oh, we expected. That's a weird thing to expect. We found calls? What is this? Throws an error when there is no match. When there is no match, it throws an error. Expect 1. Oh, I must have just made a mistake. I must have accidentally erased that 0 when I was changing it. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So when I just pasted in that string, I accidentally got rid of the 0. Okay. There we go. Nice. Wow, this is a real chore, turning this one little red test green, isn't it? So now we want to make it have a colon after. We want to make it have. Let's go back to our test we're actually trying to solve right now, which is in verify. It should be this one. We just want a number followed by a colon. And then we're going to expand on that colon to actually, the sort of suffix of our whole message, of our whole error message is going to have a long list of things by the time we're done. But for this test, we just need to do the minimum necessary. So we need to pass in. Do we need to pass something in? Do we just need to tack on something at the end? Oh no, instead of the word, yes, instead of the word calls, we're saying that we found, instead of the calls and the count, we're saying, no, this still is, no, it really is just this part. Maybe this is the case where I'm not going to be as fancy as Angular. Why put that word calls there in one case but not the other? It doesn't seem like a meaningful difference in the text. So I could say expected no open calls, found 1. I could say expect no open calls. Right, so it would end up looking like that to turn it green. I almost feel like going back on all the stuff I just did. I mean, why that difference? Why not just let this guy tack on a little suffix to the error instead of trying to build something fancy into this whole framework? Why don't I just do that and remove all the changes remove all the changes I just did up here? Let me just compare. Whoa, that wasn't the right keyboard shortcut. Let me just compare with find all my changes from the most recent and Git, and oh gosh, make sure that my picture is not covering it. There you go, so you guys can see everything I'm doing. And just undo all those changes I did. Who cares about having that string calls there? We didn't need it before. Angular doesn't even have it in the other case. And I don't see it really adding anything useful in our case. Yeah. See if we're back to the same kind of state we are without that string in there. No, we need to match by function, comma, found 0, comma, found 0. Oh my gosh, why is this so difficult? So I've heard it said that some people really appreciate I undid too much. Okay, so I want to search for this string. Sorry, I will finish my previous thought in just a moment and replace it with that string. Now, how are we doing? I've heard it said by people who like live coding that one of the things they like about it is they see that people who are experienced uh, can struggle, and they don't just know how to do everything without any mistakes right from the start. So hopefully someone is getting that encouragement right now. I've been doing this for 14 years, and sometimes I just get caught in this dumb little loop of stuff that should be easy, and it just is a struggle. And I'm sorry that you have to watch it, but maybe that's of some comfort. Um, okay, great. So minimum necessary to make this pass is to build the error message and tack on a colon. That's what I could have done a half hour ago. Almost. Uh, expected no open calls, found 2, colon. And what was... So that's what I got. And what did I think that I should get? We need this to have parentheses. And I'm not going to worry about making that consistent. Grammatically consistent. Like, that's something that the Angular team looks like they're doing. Like, make sure, they pluralize everything correctly in their error message. They're like, come on, guys, this is just an error message. This doesn't really help. Wow. We got to the green part of red-green refactor. Surprised that I haven't used Stack Overflow. Yeah. It is a normal part of any developer's working process. So, you should be encouraged. You don't feel bad if you don't know the answers off the top of your head and you have to go look them up. That's expected. I conduct interviews, and I tell people right at the beginning, even during we'll do a remote programming interview where I give them a couple of exercises for them to, well, one where they write code on their machine and they're screen sharing, and I tell them right off the bat, look, we're trying to simulate a real working scenario situation here. Like, simulate it. It's just an interview. It's not going to be very real, but Google things. Go use Stack Overflow. Talk to me like I'm a team member, and let's collaborate, because that's the way the real world works. Whew. Okay. Refactor. We've got some refactoring to do. This has been a bit ugly so far. So the first thing on my mind is that one thing I just did. I want to pull this out into, oops, just message will say, oh my gosh, did I hit caps lock? Because then in a minute we're going to add a lot more to that message with all the stringified JSON of the argument lists. I don't like that this is like, I don't know, like magic strings. What does this mean? So I think I want to move more of these arguments down into this destructuring style, so that when I come back and read this code later, I don't have to keep bouncing my eyes back and forth, hovering over, looking at the docs, trying to figure out what does no open mean. And for that to be meaningful, I'm going to have good names for these as well. So let's start working that direction. Let's move. I almost feel like moving everything into it. Well, I've got some serious syntax error somewhere. Oh, one more of these to get rid of. Okay. If you're not familiar with this, horrible syntax from TypeScript. It's just ugly. Um, you can't define the type here where at the same time that you're destructuring it. Um, and so we'd have to like have the list of variable names that we destructure into separate from the all the typing information. You can do some if you're going to define default values for all of them, you can have there's a little like workaround to make it more succinct, but that's not the case here. So okay, we've got that right, and now we just have to go change all the places we call it. So it was, let's see, it was, what order was it in before? It was description followed by expected description. We will improve these names next, followed by matches. Yeah. And we're definitely going to want that, good thing we have that test suite to go back and run and make sure I got all this right. So we want to, again, move this into the same sort of format. I should look again. I use WebStorm as my IDE. It has a lot of powerful refactoring tools in it. Like I can, I think just built into the TypeScript language service, you can rename functions, and it will rename it everywhere in your code base. And so that's great, and all of the editors that use TypeScript should be doing that already. But then WebStorm has all this other cool stuff. Like I can add a new parameter. I can give it a default value. It's going to go, and whatever I put here is going to add that to every place that's calling it. So so we can have like the default, like the TypeScript default, but then there can also just be, if you don't want that, you can instead just have the editor fill in whatever default you want here every place it's called. You can change the order of the arguments and all kinds of cool stuff. But anyway, all that to then give the excuse, last I checked, it did not have good refactoring tools, at least yet, around these destructured arguments, parameters. So this is unfortunately much more manual. Description, this was the expected description. And this is, yeah, matches. And we have one more to go. So basically I'm just moving this to here. We have the description, we have the expected description, the matches, and the criterion. Okay, and that's just a linting error, so hopefully if I did that right, we should still be green. And this again is the benefit of that red-green refactor style. I've got the green, so now I can refactor, and every time I make a change, just run this and make sure I did it right. And if it's red, I know exactly where, within like 3 different lines, I made a mistake in one of those 3. Right. Okay, names. I said we would do names next. So the whole point of how I switched this up, where am I trying to look? Here. I have something called a description and an expected description, and that's still not very meaningful as I'm coming in and reading this in the future. So let's figure out better names for these things. Criterion makes sense. I like that one. That tells me, what what was I trying to match by that failed, that I either got too many or too few of that criterion for matching. But description and expected description, that's terrible. Those are terrible names. You can tell because they're basically the same name twice in a row. So if you have 2 things that have the same name, something's wrong. That's a rule on my team. Nothing will ever pass a PR review if you've got 2 things with the same name, or if you've got the same thing that has 2 different names in different parts of the code. Now, if you can naming, if you take the time to get your names right, it feels like a real chore, because sometimes you're like, why can't I think of a stupid name for the stupid thing? And I don't want to spend 15 minutes not writing any code and just trying to come up with a name. But the thing is, once you get a big code base, you've got a whole team working in it. If you're nice and consistent with your names all the way through and they're good names, all of your objects have noun names and all of your functions have verb names, and they are descriptive but not too long, and all those things that go into making a good name. It's amazing how much better it is to work in that code base. You spend 15 minutes thinking of a name each time you make a new name, but then in the end, the payoff is huge if you're going to spend much time. I haven't done any real studies to prove that, but my experience tells me that that's true. And take it as an anecdotal evidence or something. Okay, what was I doing? We were trying to rename these two things. Love some brainstorm if you want to put it in the chat. If you know what's going on here and you have a good name, please let me know. We can speed this whole part up. So the description is the description of the criterion. It's like, yeah, this is the description of the criterion. So what's the difference between that and this? Gosh, we could almost make this the responsibility of the calling. Let's see what values we pass in for this thing. Maybe we can get rid of description entirely and just include that in criterion, if that doesn't cause any repeated code up above. So in this case, the description is what the user passed in. But in that case, we don't know if it's an array. Okay. So I tell you what, let's do. Let's extract this out into a helper function. Call that in the two places that need it up here. So we're not going to repeat the code, but then we're going to, this is already too long anyway. I've got a linting error that says this method is now out of hand. You're going to need to trim that down. And I set these up for myself and I obey them. It's amazing how many times you set up a linting error like this and you're like, oh, error, this is 26 lines and you're only allowed 25. And you're like, oh, but it's so close and I can understand this easily enough. But it's amazing how many times where you think that, but then you go in and you break it up, and in the end you're like, oh no, actually this is a lot clearer now. This is a lot better code. So I know this is too long already anyway, and so this is an opportunity to pull this out. Let's pull this part out into something like build, I don't know, criterion based on a description, which is a string, and we still might need to rename that, but let me just get it working first. Description, which is a string, yup, or undefined. Cool. And then we're going to end up with, and what are we going to call? Let's call this whole thing in the end the criterion. Yeah. Okay, so let's just get it. No, that wasn't it. We want to, oh, this requires both this crazy thing and this. Oh. Comma. Oh, required, yeah, of course. And maybe I'll swap those around. Thanks for the question. What are we describing? We are basically right now I'm trying to pull this part out so that in the end it's the criterion, criterion by which the user is trying to match a request, right? So it's basically some string representation of this argument. So when you call expect1, you can pass in an array of arguments. And so if we, like here, this array we passed in here, we could make a couple calls. We could make a bunch of calls, and then we could expect two of them based on which arguments we passed in. So that would be the match here. And then alternatively, you could pass in a predicate instead of, and then you have full flexibility of anything you want to possibly match by to pull out that one thing you're interested in for your test. And so the whole goal here is to build up the string representation of that to give back to the user so that when their test fails, they have a nice string representation to tell them what went wrong. What did they expect to find? The criterion is by what criteria were you looking for something that you didn't get the right match, and give that info back to them so they can quickly see it and know, oh, I know what the problem is there, instead of, just if the message just said, oh, there's an error, they have to go dig in and do some debugging and figure out exactly why is that an error. If you give them a nice message. And so the part of the message we're building now describes the criterion they gave us to match by. And thank you for asking me, because stopping to describe all that really helped clarify to me, for myself, what was going on too. Okay, so, and then we're going to end up returning description. And there's a little more refactoring to do here, but let's try and get this green first. So then let's build criterion. We're building the description of the criterion. And the problem is build. Ooh. There's a different naming. Okay, so we could also call this something like user input as string, because basically we're repeating back to them the input they gave us, right? So it's sort of a pretty stringify, human readable stringify of the input they gave us. So then, oh, I like this. Then we can just take the exact method signature of what they give us with the same names. So this was this we called match, and we might as well put it in the same order then as what they're giving us. Description, we might as well make this look similar to the same thing above. And so now to stringify the user input, in fact, let's even call it that, stringify user input. If they didn't give us, so they might give us a description and then that's the user input. That is, they already gave us the string representation. But if not, then we have to build it ourselves based on this match that they gave us. Okay. And so then here, rather than taking both the trying to do all this part ourselves, the description and the criterion, we can say, what can we say? We can say, instead of either of those, we can take the stringified user input. And the trick is that this could be undefined in our new case. So if we have it, we just tack it on. And what exactly do we tack on? For criterion, this was the part that we just oh yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have written that. This is the part that we just extracted down into our helper. And now in our verify case, we no longer need to pass in the criterion, which was undefined anyway, nor the description. Oops. Oh, there was still something we needed. The matches we have, the expected. Oh, no. What was our error message there? Some of these can get hard to read, can't they? Property description is missing in the type blah blah blah, but required. Property description is missing. Oh, we just missed it from there. Okay. That's sort of part of the pain of this really awkward syntax in TypeScript. You have to keep these two in sync. Okay. It would have been nice if they gave me the error message down here saying, hey, you didn't even destructure all the things you said you were requiring. But okay, anyway. And then up here, instead of the description or the criterion, we're going to do the stringified user input is this dot stringify user input match description. And same thing here. Oops, didn't get that copied. And oh, and this returns a string. Oh. Ah, we don't need this anymore because we definitely have a match. Okay, and then TypeScript knows that this is defined and it knows that return type matches. That's great. The TypeScript, I would never have spotted. I don't know if I would have ever spotted that, but I'll show you more slowly what just happened. TypeScript is saying, hey, this could be undefined. String or undefined is not assignable to what you just said that should return, which is a string. And so I've set up, in fact, Angular now comes with predefined the linting rules saying, hey, you don't have to put, TypeScript doesn't require you to put a return type here, but we're going to tell you that's good practice. And here's one of the reasons why, because if you define that explicitly and you made a mistake here and the return type is wrong, it tells you right off the bat. And in searching, I was like, okay, but by the time I get down to here, description should be defined. It should know that if it wasn't defined, I'm either going to do this or this. But it says, oh no, there's an if there. Now it's guaranteed to be defined by the end, and TypeScript no longer complains. Cool, cool, cool. And everything compiles here. Let's see how much we broke. There we go. That's another benefit of this red-green refactor is now I'm confident. I have a little, what's that called? A dopamine hit or whatever it is, like the satisfaction of like, hey, all that stuff I just did is correct. And we even got rid of our linting error saying that this function was too long in the process for free. Any more refactoring we want to do? We've got the names. Oh no, there's a name expected description. One thing left to name. So we expected something calls, and this could be like no calls or 3 calls or 0 spelled out word 0 calls. Yeah, so it's the word 1, the word 0, or the word no. Oh, 0 matching, 1 matching, or no. So what is that called? That's the, it's not the number, it's not just the number of matches, it's the expected I don't know. I don't have a better idea than count. Expected call count. Expected match type. Match type. So match type is no open. That kind of makes sense. Match type is 0 matching. Match type is 1 matching. I'm going to call that good enough. So we expected the match type calls for this criterion that is based on the user input, and we found this many. Cool, cool, cool. Oh, was that the end of that test? Did we finish that test? That took forever. Oh, I should have seen what you laughed at. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I'm glad you're excited like me, or at least encouraging. I appreciate the encouragement. Oh, let me fix my spelling. Stringified. Stringified. I think that's, whoa. Cancel. What did I do? Stringified. Yeah, I think that's better. Great. I feel like the refactoring is done. We finally finished that. What usually, hopefully, is meant to be a short, tight cycle of red-green refactor. There was a enormous, messy cycle of it, but I think that's the cycle, and that's amazing. That means all we have left is a test for the that representation of the arguments at the end. I mean, that I can remember off the top of my head. We probably have more than that, but it includes a nice representation of the outstanding calls. In the error message. And so for that, are we going to end up collapsing these down into one bigger test again? We might, but let's start as 2 tests and see where we end up. So if we have 2 of them out there, yeah, I don't think we need this extra case. Let's just do this first case where we set it up, and then we exercise it and have the expectation. But now we want to say that it includes, and now we're going to have to play with what we want the string representation to be. So honestly, this is a case where test-driven development fails me again because I don't know exactly what I want it to do. So I can't really write the proper test for it yet. I have to play with it. I have to make it work, mess with it, see what I like, and then make the test match. So, I switch back and forth between TDD or not. And so, because if you remember, we looked at, I don't have it up here anymore. Here, we looked at the representation for when there are for the Angular framework, when there are 2 outstanding web requests, it just puts them all in one line with a comma separating them. But for us, we already have commas separating all the arguments in each individual call. And so if we're trying to print out a representation of multiple different calls, we can't just comma separate them. And I feel like I probably want new lines. And anyway, I'm repeating myself from earlier. Let me just mess around with this a bit and see what we end up liking. So here, this suffix, we tacked on the colon. We need to tack on a lot more than just a colon. So let's do something similar. Let's make that a string that we keep tacking onto. So message colon, and then let's just go with something like, gosh, it's going to be all the outstanding test calls. we're going to map that to the, where was that JSON.stringify? Here. Right. We want something similar to this. And so let's go ahead and capture that. We probably want the same string representation no matter where it shows up in an error message, whether it was the arguments you passed in to the user input because you wanted it to match those, or if it's the string representation of the arguments of the actual function calls we're giving back, we should use the same one. So let's capture that by making it a, let's see, use RubyMine. Extract a method called arguments, no, stringify arguments. Wait, I'm putting this in the wrong place. Use RubyMine. Oh, it's not going to make it a method, it's going to make it a function. But actually, that's fine. It can be a function. Let's go stringify arguments is really what we're doing here. And I like to put those, like I said, I like the details at the bottom. So I'm going to move that to the bottom. And this returns, obviously, a string. I think I've got all these to-dos all over my code because I'm delaying getting the typing information all set up for my users until a dedicated stream, because I want to show all the tips and tricks for getting typing right so that users have a real nice experience in their editor and with autocomplete and with error messages and everything. I'm going to make that a dedicated topic. And so I'm just adding to-dos everywhere that I'm using any right now because I need to come back later and improve those. And now we can use that same thing here. Stringify arguments of the callinfo.args. And I wonder if we could, do we have to do similar work? Where did we call this before? Right, the user gives us just an array of arguments, and so we have to do a special work here to get down to the array of arguments, wherever I just did that right here. Okay, so now we've got the string representation, and let's join that with, I don't know, a new line and a couple spaces to start with. It means we'll probably need a new line here as well, and see what that looks like. Oh, we've got a different problem. Cannot read property args of undefined. Call info. How can call info be undefined? What? Okay. Including the, oh, let me open, I want to set a breakpoint here. Async. What's the name of this? Async method controller spec. I want to find including the number of calls, and I want to set a breakpoint. Oh no, the error is not happening in the test. It's happening in the production code. I want to set a breakpoint, I assume, on, let's see, on line 241. No, it is on the spec. 241. Oh, no, Jasmine, you're failing me. Jasmine's giving me the stack trace. Right, we caught the error that now I'm trying to find the source of. So I should be able to drill down easily by commenting that out for a moment, rerunning the test, and then I'll actually get the real stack trace I'm trying to figure out. It'll give me a line number and everything. Line 88 of the production code. 88 is here, right. That's what I figured it probably was, but okay, so we want to set a breakpoint here inside one of these map things. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but um, it's really slick. This will stop when it gets, there's multiple times where you could stop in this line because there's sort of an embedded loop. There's this embedded callback all in the same line as where you call it from. So this lets you choose where you want to actually have your breakpoint. And now our call is a test call. Oh, I know exactly what's going on. Oh, that's so cool. The test shows me something I didn't think of. Okay, so we've got as I was setting this up in the past, I realized because of the tools available with Jasmine and using these spies, which is the mechanism behind being able to intercept all of these async method calls and deal with them, change it to the way you can work with them, the way we're making it able to work with them, similar to Angular. But we still are using normal spies behind the scenes. We just got a lot of wrapper code around it to give us all this nice error messaging, and you can delay it and do expect one and flush and all that. But there was a limitation where I had to sort of be a little bit hacky. We have to keep track of the spies themselves, or the spy itself, and the calls that are made to it, so that here, ensure call info is set at all the right times. It has to run through lining up the test call object itself with the Jasmine call info object, and we have to set that sort of unfortunately later. And so in this in between time, this test call actually will not have one of these. This will be undefined until we call this to loop through all of our test calls, finding the ones that do not yet have call info and setting it to the matching call from Jasmine. And I won't go into great detail there. That's in a previous stream. It's on YouTube. Instead, I will just call this to ensure we have it. This dot ensure call info is set. So before we ever you can work with one of these, we have to make sure that's fully initialized. So this basically finishes the initialization that we wished we could do right from the start and not even have this weird in-between scenario. Okay, so that's great. We can put, actually, well, yeah, we have to see what this looks like. How is the user going to do this? The user is just going to have it like that. They're not going to have it in an expect and catch type thing. So as I'm trying to see what I want this error message to look like to the user, I should use it like the user, which is exactly like this. And we've got the new line. That's cool. I don't know what the colon is doing on the end or why the indentation is weird. Oh, the colon's on the end because I didn't ever erase it from there. I just feel like moving this up here because it's going to be easier for me to process what I'm seeing. Ah, okay. Maybe what we want is not really, maybe what we want is for every single one of these to start with the colon and the indentation. Or I mean the new line and the indentation. So we're not going to put it here at all. And then we're going to just join it with nothing. Or instead of mapping, that's going to be a nice semantic way to do it. So for each, I don't know, args string of, for each test call of this dot test calls, let's just do message plus equals this guy, instead of trying to map and join. Join is great. Oh, test call. Join is great when you only want the string in between each of the things in your array. But here I want it at the beginning of every one, even the first one. And so join wasn't really the right tool for the job. Hey! Oh, sorry. I saw this line of green. I thought we did it, but there's two red X's. Oh no, but I really like the I like the way this looks. And you know what? This is better than Angular. You know how I kept copy pasting the expected and the actual so that I could get them above and below each other? I guess we still don't have the expected above the actual, but still, this is a much more readable format. Love it. What we have to do though is get the colon back here. Oh, gosh. I have a feeling that's going to be a little uglier, but that's all right. Okay. Yeah, I'm very satisfied with that. So now let's set up our test to expect it to actually be that. So we want our error message to include a new line, 2 spaces, and call 1. And then another new line, 2 spaces, and call 2. No, not there yet. Oh, I need quotes around these because these are string arguments. Okay. Oh, that's cool. Wow. That is the end of what I have like at the tip of my the tip of my mind is what I was about to say. I had the head at the front of my mind to do here for this whole thing. We might have just knocked out this thing here, but normally when I think that I'm wrong, and there's a little more to go. So let me just review again. We want to do this verify, which matches this function from Angular. Verifies that no unmatched calls are outstanding. We are doing that part. If any of them are, it fills with an error message indicating which ones were not handled. Yeah, we did that much. We've got everything tested. We know because we were writing the tests before we even wrote the production code most of the time. Oh, you know what? Here's one little piece of refactoring. I noticed that I have this 4 different times in my code now. So let me pull this out into a shared type. I don't know. The argument is called match, so the type could be called match, and that equals this guy. Oh, I wonder if WebStorm can extract this for me. I haven't played with that with types, and then it could do all 3 at once and refactor, extract type alias. Doesn't say extract, it just says type alias. What does that do? Replace all 4. Oh, yay! This is the match type. Done. Now, if I start using that enough, I'll make a keyboard shortcut and be able to do that very quickly in the future. Okay, lovely. And then all of these to-dos now can just go up here. And I can remove them from these, and we'll get to see that now we get a nice tight description that's easy to read and I don't know, more aesthetically pleasing. Match. Stringify arguments. Why did I call that match? These are... Oh, that was automatically named because this one was called match, and I had to RubyMine. At work, I use RubyMine because we have some Ruby backend. But this is the same JetBrains IDE. It's just WebStorm. It doesn't have all the Ruby functionality. So I used WebStorm to extract this out and refactor it, and it just kept the same name here. But it's not always a match. It's just we'll just call it the args. Stringify. Yeah, let's be consistent. Let's always call it args. And right, so it is. We do still need the to do here because that's not using that match type that I've already left the comment on up there. That's how that whole process gets started. Great. Let me just peek at this. We passed it all the right things. Yeah. That's looking pretty nice, I think. So we've got nicely refactored code. It's green. It's well tested. I've got to-dos later for things like writing the documentation for it and fixing all the typing. I think that's it. I think we've got a mission accomplished already. That only took, let's see, was it 15 minutes on the first little thing? So that only took it took under 2 hours for these, what, 9 lines? What is that? 79, 68, 9 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh no, it's 12 lines. That makes perfect sense then. 12 lines should definitely take 2 hours. No, there's a lot of refactoring. Refactoring always takes a long time. Not always, but often takes a long time. And is totally worth it if it's code that you're going to maintain for a long time. So at work, we have one main code base that we, have been developing for, I want to say roughly 5 years, and we plan to keep using it for a long time, and it's growing, and so it's very important to be in the sort of a spectrum from prototype quality code to like perfect, elegant, extensible code. We like to be pretty far over to the high quality code end because this is like, we're going to keep working in this for a long time. Now, sometimes we'll switch and we just want to try something out and throw up a prototype in front of users to get some feedback. Well, we're going to totally switch modes. We're going to do quick and dirty and fast and just make it work, but we're not going to commit it to master. It's going to be in a separate environment, so that there's no chance that that could stick around and cause us problems later. And then everyone knows that once we get to something we like in the prototype world, there's going to be a long road to then write that at high quality with all of the tests and maintainable to then finally be a real production grade, permanent part of our product. And so that's why I say refactoring often takes a long time. You write it, you can get it working quickly, but then to make it really nice, that's where all the investment goes in software, in my experience. And again, totally worth it if you're going to keep maintaining that same code base. Right. I lost my train of thought. I was just justifying why it took 2 hours to write these 12 lines. Um, I mean, maybe I could have been a little faster, but you can't always be on top of your game. Um, Great. So I think that's a commit. Um, so what did we do? We just added async testing controller dot verify. And let's see. Oh, we still don't have that knocked out of our to-do list. When you're committing at the end, normally I'd like to commit faster than 2 hours, but it just sort of took that long to get just one cohesive thing done. Maybe I should have thought earlier about how to break that down into smaller, achievable pieces to commit separately. But 2 hours isn't too bad. It's acceptable. It's not my ideal, but it's acceptable. But then when you're done, I always want to go through all of my changes and carefully look at them and make sure I didn't forget anything. That sometimes I left myself a to do and I forget until I go back and look at the diff like this. Make sure everything is nice and cohesive for someone who's going to look at it later. And so let's see, we added to verify, but then I already see we did something more than that. And we sort of had to do it all at the same time. We didn't have to, but we did it all at the same time. Fix silly oversight in error messages. So that's just this request to calls thing. I was using the HTTP terminology instead of the async method terminology. Then we have all of our tests, and I don't see any like to-dos. They seem nicely formatted. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. I'll push that up. I do have continuous integration on this project. So this is in a larger library called, or larger GitHub. It's a monorepo of many actual libraries that you can import separately through npm into your package. So the one we're working on now is part of this called ngdev, but now it's going to run the test suite in GitHub. I use GitHub Actions. All of the test suites for all of the libraries. And the linting for all of the libraries, which it doesn't have to do all of that. That's a little redundant, but it only takes a couple minutes, and so it's fine. And so we should expect that to be green because nothing we wrote is actually being used by anything else in the entire project. This is the first time we're creating this guy. So I fully expect that to be good to go. And is there anything else I'm missing? I'm feeling pretty good about this. Thanks for sticking with me all the way here to the end. Hopefully I'm doing this to just be able to talk through all of my process and give all these little, what I consider tips and tricks that I've picked up in my experience, especially for being on a team, which I've learned in the last 6 years. Lots of lessons learned there, and I try and mix that in. I hope you enjoyed it, found something both interesting and useful for the future. And yeah, thanks for sticking. I know you were here for a long time with me here, Ende, however you say your name. It's great. It's great to have that interaction. I appreciate it. I'm going to be signing out here real soon too. So you have a good night. And to everyone else on the stream or in YouTube land, I'm going to put links in the comments below or in the description below to the code, the 2 commits we made during this, so you can go check it out. Play with it yourself if you want. This is an open source library here. Simonton Software is my little company under which I do a lot of this stuff, and slibs then is the name of the monorepo. So you just search GitHub for that. You'll get here. I'm off in a branch right now. If you see this real soon, I'm off in a branch right now called Async Test Helpers, if you want to find all that. But again, I'll put links to the actual commits themselves. Let me know what helps you or not in the comments below. And happy coding.